Life and Death, 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year B. The readings for today are on life and death. The excerpt from Wisdom rejects the notion that God created man to die. Rather, Wisdom teaches God formed man to be imperishable. According to Wisdom, the reason man was created by God to be immortal is because men and women are created in God's image. Being in the image of God means being like God. God, who is not a God of the dead, but of the living, as Jesus said. The devil's envy is the reason why we die, explains Wisdom. Wisdom states, by the evil of the devil, or by the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and they who belong to his company experience it. When we sin, we often deceive ourselves by thinking that the sin we are committing will bring life, will bring happiness. But in the end, and our experience bears this out, sin only brings more misery. Sin brings more death. For, as Augustine teaches, sin is not essentially about breaking rules. Rather, sinning is choosing an action that will cause me to be miserable, sad, and frustrated. In other words, sin brings about death. Sin is misery. The reading from Wisdom that teaches sin is the reason why we die is followed by the responsorial psalm, in which the psalmist cries out in praise to God for having rescued me. God has rescued us from the misery of sin, the misery of death. God has offered us a way for our mourning to be changed into dancing, as the psalmist states, where we will thank God forever in an eternal state of happiness. The reading from the Gospel presents to us how God has rescued us from the misery of sin. In the person of Jesus, God offers us a relationship that will heal us from the wound of sin and lead us on the path to eternal life, on the original path intended by God from the beginning, since we are created in God's image. We were created for eternal life and not for death. The Gospel passage describes two people who Jesus heals, who Jesus restores to life. First, there is the woman who was afflicted with uncontrollable bleeding. According to the Old Testament, explains Brant Petrie, since life was believed to be in the blood, loss of blood means loss of life. In other words, loss of blood signifies death. By healing the woman from her uncontrollable bleeding, Jesus was affirming that he is God who restores us to life. The second person Jesus heals is a little girl who has died. Before restoring her to life, Jesus says that the child is not dead but asleep. Petrie explains this verse in reference to Jewish culture, in which Jesus spoke these words. Jewish culture, which the Bible reflects, understood death and describes death as a type of sleep. For example, Psalm 13 refers to the sleep of death. That's verse 3. And Paul, when identifying some of his brethren who have died in the 1 Corinthians chapter 15, refers to them as some have fallen asleep. Jesus wants to touch us and restore us to life. A principal way that Jesus restores us to life is through the 7 sacraments, through the church, by which Jesus offers his healing, life-giving presence to us in time. It is possible, though, to encounter Jesus in the sacraments, to literally touch Jesus' risen body in the Eucharist and not be restored to life. A similar occurrence took place, comments Petrie, with the crowd of people who all surrounded Jesus, most of them touched him. And yet only one is healed, the woman with the uncontrollable flow of blood. Why was she healed and the many other people who touched Jesus were not? She was healed because of her faith. For this reason, Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has saved you." Today, In faith, may we reach out to Jesus as a son and daughter and allow his touch to restore us to life, to allow Jesus' touch through the sacraments to to enable us to participate more deeply in eternal life. For God did not create us to die. God created us to live. God created us for eternal life. God bless.